They always warned travelers about Devil's Ridge. It was the kind of place woven into whispers, never full sentences. Old-timers at the diner would stop talking when outsiders walked in, the way people do when they're afraid of saying too much. There were rules about Devil's Ridge, though no one ever wrote them down. Never go there after dark. Never follow the lights. And if you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. The locals had seen enough to believe those rules kept you alive. Outsiders never listened. Ethan was one of those outsiders. 29 years old, a traveling salesman with more miles on his car than money in his account, heading toward Tennessee on the last leg of a long trip. He was exhausted. He'd been driving for hours through winding back roads and fading daylight when his GPS offered him a shortcut, Devil's Ridge Road. The name didn't even register until the gas station stopped 20 minutes later. He mentioned it casually to the clerk, a thin man with deep lines in his face while paying for gas and a coffee. Devil's Ridge, the clerk repeated softly like the words themselves carried weight. Yeah, Ethan said. Cuts through the hills, right? Saves me half an hour. The clerk leaned on the counter, studying him. Son, you don't want to be on that road after sunset. Ethan smiled tiredly. Why? Bad pavement? The man didn't smile back. Bad everything, he said finally. People see lights out there, follow them sometimes, folks go missing. Ethan chuckled, thinking it was small-town superstition. I'll be fine. The clerk's eyes didn't leave his. You see a lantern out there, you keep driving, don't you stop, don't you follow. Ethan left the gas station with a smirk, but a faint chill crawled up his spine. By the time he reached Devil's Ridge Road, the sun was gone. A heavy Appalachian night swallowed the hills. The road twisted through dense forest. His headlights cut narrow tunnels of pale light through walls of trees on either side. He turned the radio on low. Static crackled between stations, the signal weak out here. 20 minutes in, Ethan saw it. A faint yellow-white glow through the trees ahead. At first he thought it was a house light. Maybe someone lived out here after all. But as he drove closer, the light moved. It wasn't steady like a porch lamp. It swayed gently like someone carrying it. He slowed the car, rolled the window down. The night air was cold and still. Hey, he called out, you need help? The figure holding the lantern didn't answer. It moved slowly along the tree line, keeping just inside the shadows. Ethan frowned. He pulled over, hazard lights flashing, and grabbed his flashlight. Sir, you okay out here? No response. The lantern bobbed deeper into the woods. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan followed. Maybe it was concern, maybe curiosity. Maybe that strange pull people feel when they see something they can't quite understand. The forest swallowed the sound of his footsteps. The air felt heavier here, thick and damp like it hadn't moved in years. The lantern floated steadily ahead, always just far enough that Ethan couldn't see the person holding it. Sir, you're gonna get hurt out here, he called, irritation creeping in now. The light paused. For the first time, Ethan saw a faint outline of the figure. Tall, thin, shoulders slightly hunched. The lantern turned sharply left, disappearing behind the trees. Ethan jogged to catch up. When he reached the spot, there was nothing, just darkness. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Circling him just beyond the beam of his flashlight. Ethan spun. Hey, enough games, man. The footsteps stopped. The lantern flared to life again, closer this time. Too close. Ethan turned slowly toward the glow. The figure stood 15 feet away. Lantern held high, face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. Ethan's mouth was dry. Look, I don't want any trouble, I just thought you needed help. The figure tilted its head slowly like a curious animal. Then it started walking away again. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Against every instinct screaming at him to leave, Ethan followed. The forest grew stranger the deeper they went. Trees bent at odd angles, as if something huge had pressed through them long ago. The ground sloped downhill toward a faint clearing. Finally, the figure stopped. Ethan stepped closer, breathing hard. The beam of his flashlight swept past the figure toward what lay ahead. An old, collapsed mine entrance yawned at the base of the hill. Wooden beams jutted like broken teeth from the dark mouth. And in that darkness, eyes stared back at him. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Small, pale, glinting eyes that didn't blink. Lanterns flared to life one by one inside the mine, glowing faintly yellow. And then shapes began to emerge. Figures. Thin, wrong-shaped figures holding old, rusted lanterns stepping slowly into the clearing. Ethan stumbled back. The first figure, the one he'd followed, finally turned toward him. And Ethan saw its face. It wasn't a face at all. Just pale skin stretched too tight, mouth too wide, eyes burning faint yellow like the lanterns themselves. The other figures began moving toward him. Dozens of them. Silent. Steady. Ethan ran. Branches tore at his arms as lights bloomed behind him, spreading through the forest like fire. The air filled with footsteps. So many footsteps. He didn't stop until the road came into view, his car a dim shape in the distance. He dove inside, tires spitting gravel as he roared away. In his rearview mirror, the lanterns lined the edge of the forest, dozens of them, watching, unmoving. When Ethan reached the next town, pale and shaking, he told the diner waitress everything. She listened without expression. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "You saw the lantern man," she said softly. Ethan didn't speak, didn't sleep, didn't stop driving until he was 3 states away. But sometimes when he closed his eyes, he still saw them. Lanterns burning in the trees, waiting for him to come back. Boone Creek ran like a black ribbon through the Appalachian hills, twisting and turning beneath moss-covered bridges and ancient trees that blocked out the sun even at midday. Locals said the creek was older than the towns themselves, older than the mines, older even than the people who'd lived here for centuries. And they said it was haunted, not in the way of houses with footsteps in the attic or ghostly figures in doorways. Boone Creek had something living in it. Something that wasn't flesh and bone the way people were. Something that had always been here, long before roads or towns or bridges were built. They called it the thing that waited. Tom didn't believe any of it. He was 22, a college student home for summer break, with too much time on his hands and a taste for cheap beer and fishing. So when his cousin Luke told him about the stories, about people vanishing along the creek at night, Tom laughed. "Old folks trying to scare kids," he said, stringing up his fishing rod. "There's nothing out here but snakes and catfish." Luke shook his head. "They found a boat last summer, you know. Half sunk. Belonged to a guy from Pikeville. They never found him. Drunk and fell in," Tom said. Luke didn't argue. He just looked down at the water like he was listening for something. That night, the two cousins carried their rods, tackle box, and a small cooler of beer down to the creek. The air was thick, buzzing with crickets and frogs. Moonlight broke through in patches, silvering the ripples of the slow-moving water. They set up on a gravel bar, lines cast into the dark current. For a while it was peaceful. Tom cracked open a beer. "See, nothing out here but us." Luke didn't answer. He was staring at the water. "Something wrong?" Tom asked. Luke frowned. "You hear that?" Tom listened. Just the usual night sounds. Then maybe something else. A faint splash. Upstream. "Probably a beaver," Tom said. But the sound came again. Closer this time. Like someone waiting. Tom shined his flashlight upstream. The beam caught only rippling water and leaning trees. "See? Nothing," he said, but his voice lacked confidence. Luke reeled in his line slowly. "We should pack it up." Tom smirked. Scared of the dark? But then he saw it too. Something broke the surface midstream. A pale shape just for a second before slipping under again. Too big for a fish. Too smooth for driftwood. Tom stood slowly. The water bulged as though something massive moved just beneath it, heading downstream, heading toward them. "Let's go," Luke whispered. They backed toward the tree line, rods forgotten. The thing surfaced again 20 feet out. Moonlight glistened off something pale. Skin, scales. Hard to tell before it sank silently once more. Then the voice came. Soft, almost human. "Help!" Tom froze. It came from the water. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Luke nodded slowly. "Help!" Closer now. A shape rose from the creek, half human, half something else. Arms too long, head too smooth, eyes reflecting the moon like an animal's. It stood chest deep in the current, water swirling around it. "Help me," it said again, the words wrong in its mouth, stretched too thin. Tom's breath caught. That wasn't a man. The thing began moving toward shore, slow, deliberate. "Run," Luke hissed. They ran. Branches whipped their faces as they tore through the dark toward the truck. Behind them, the water erupted with splashing. They didn't look back until they reached the gravel road. The creek lay silent again under the moonlight. Nothing moved. They drove back to town without speaking. Neither of them slept that night. The next morning, Tom's uncle stopped by the house. "You boys hear about the sheriff?" he asked. They shook their heads. "Patrolling near Boone Creek last night, never came home. Found his car at the bridge, door open, engine running." Tom and Luke didn't tell anyone what they saw. But sometimes late at night, Tom swore he heard water moving outside his window, like something searching, waiting. The old church on Miller's Hill had been standing longer than anyone could remember. Built by settlers in the early 1800s, it had seen fires, storms, even the Civil War, but it had never fallen. The last congregation left decades ago when the roof started leaking and the floorboards turned soft underfoot. Now it was nothing but a ruin. Windows smashed, doors chained shut, the bell tower leaning like a drunk about to collapse. But the bell still rang. Every night. At midnight. 12 deep hollow tolls that rolled down the hillside like thunder. And nobody knew why. Some said it was the wind. Others claimed kids snuck in to play pranks. But folks who lived nearby swore they'd hear it clear as day, even during rainstorms when no one would be foolish enough to be out there. The older residents told darker stories about a preacher who'd gone mad, locking his congregation inside before ringing the bell one last time as the church went up in flames. But the fire never happened. There were no records of it, no graves, no missing townsfolk. Just stories passed down like warnings no one could explain. Marcus had grown up with those stories. As a kid, he and his friends would ride bikes near the base of Miller's Hill, daring each other to go closer after dark. They never did. One toll of the bell was enough to send every kid pedaling home with goosebumps on their arms. But Marcus was 24 now. He worked construction, drove an old truck, paid bills. Ghost stories didn't scare him anymore. So one summer evening, sitting around a bonfire with friends, the talk turned to the church again. "I'm telling you," said Kyle, Marcus's oldest friend, poking the fire with a stick. "My uncle swears he saw lights moving around in there last year. Says he saw people in the windows." "Squatters," another guy muttered, "or meth heads." Marcus laughed. "Or maybe ghosts." Kyle smirked. "You gonna go find out?" Marcus took a long pull from his beer, the flames crackling in the silence that followed. "Yeah," he said finally, "I will." The others laughed, but Marcus was serious. He grabbed his phone, his flashlight, and his keys. "Wait, you mean tonight?" Kyle asked. Marcus grinned. "Why not? Bell rings at midnight, right? Let's see what's making it ring. An hour later, Marcus's truck rumbled to a stop at the base of Miller's Hill. The others had chickened out, choosing to stay at the bonfire. "Text us when you get video of the ghost preacher," Kyle joked before Marcus left. The church loomed against the moonlit sky, its silhouette jagged with broken beams and leaning walls. The chain across the front doors glinted faintly in his flashlight beam. Marcus circled around back, weeds brushing against his jeans, and found a broken window low enough to climb through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. His flashlight beam revealed empty pews coated in dust, hymn books rotting to mush, cobwebs sagging from the rafters. The floor creaked under his boots as he moved toward the center aisle. The bell tower stairs were gone, nothing left but splintered wood clinging to the walls. The bell itself hung far above, motionless in the moonlight spilling through the holes in the roof. Marcus checked his phone. 11:54 p.m. He propped it on a pew facing the bell tower to record everything. For a while, the only sounds were wind slipping through the broken windows and the occasional creak of old wood. Then Marcus thought he heard something else. A faint shuffle, like footsteps on the balcony above the pews. He swung his flashlight upward. Nothing, just empty railing and shadow. Marcus stood near the center aisle, phone recording, heart thudding louder than he wanted to admit. Midnight. The first toll shook the air like a cannon blast. Marcus flinched, eyes jerking toward the bell tower. The bell swung slowly, heavily, as though pulled by invisible hands. Second toll. Third. Marcus stepped backward, breath fogging in the air as a sudden chill settled through the church. Fourth. Fifth. Something creaked on the balcony above the pews. Sixth. Seventh. Marcus slowly raised the flashlight toward the rafters. For a split second he saw it, a pale figure crouched among the beams, long limbs folded wrong, head cocked at an unnatural angle as it stared down at him. Eighth toll. Ninth. The thing crawled along the rafters, moving like an insect, arms bending too far as it clung to the wall. 10th. 11th. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. 12th. The final toll boomed through the church as the figure froze, head snapping toward him like it had just noticed he was there. Marcus ran, boots hammering the aisle, breath ragged, flashlight beam swinging wildly across the walls. As he climbed through the broken window, a 13th toll shook the night. The bell had never rung 13 times before. Marcus didn't stop running until he reached his truck. He drove back to the bonfire, white-faced and trembling, refusing to talk about what he saw. The next day, the police retrieved his phone from inside the church. The video showed Marcus entering, the bell ringing, the frantic escape. And then the camera kept recording after he left. The pale figure crawled headfirst down the wall like a spider, limbs bending backward, mouth opening too wide. The last thing the camera caught was the bell rope swinging slowly on its own, even though there had never been one there. Widow's Hollow was the kind of place locals talked about in half sentences. When outsiders came through the area, stopping at diners or gas stations, they'd ask about the name. "Oh, Widow's Hollow?" the old men at the counter would say, stirring their coffee. Then they'd just shake their heads. Some would say a woman lost her whole family there to sickness back in the 1800s. Others whispered about a coal mining accident that swallowed a whole camp in one night. But most folks just said the same thing. Don't stay after dark. Ben and Laura didn't believe in any of that. They were newly married, city kids looking for quiet. When they found a cabin for sale at the edge of Widow's Hollow, dirt cheap, they couldn't believe their luck. It had a tin roof, a wide porch, a wood stove, and just enough space to start a new life. Sure, it needed some work, but Ben was handy, and Laura loved the idea of living away from traffic and neighbors. The real estate agent, a thin woman with tired eyes, avoided looking directly at them when Laura asked why the place was so cheap. People just don't like living here, she said, fiddling with her pen. Why not? Ben asked. The woman hesitated, then she shook her head. You'll see. The first week was normal. Ben patched the roof, cleared brush, replaced the squeaky screen door. Laura unpacked, planted flowers by the porch, scrubbed the old cabinets until the wood shone again. At night, they'd sit on the porch swing with coffee, listening to the wind sigh through the pines. But sometimes the wind didn't blow at all, and the silence felt wrong. On the 6th night, Laura said softly, "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" Ben followed her gaze toward the woods. The tree line was dense, the underbrush a wall of black shapes under the moonlight. "It's just deer," he said, though he hadn't seen a single deer since they moved in. The first sound came 3 nights later. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on leaves just beyond the yard. Ben grabbed a flashlight and walked the perimeter, light slicing through the darkness. Nothing. But the sound stopped the second he shined the beam toward the trees. The next morning, Laura found footprints in the mud near the woodpile. Bare feet. Long, narrow, too big to be human. Could be kids messing around, Ben said, but his voice lacked conviction. 2 nights later, Laura woke Ben at 2:17 a.m. "There's someone out there," she whispered. Ben got up, heart hammering, and crept to the window. At the tree line between 2 thick oaks, something moved. A shape. Tall. Still. Watching. He burst onto the porch, flashlight blazing. The shape melted back into the trees without a sound. Over the next week, the sightings grew frequent. Always at dusk or deep into the night. Always at the tree line. Never closer. Never speaking. Just watching. Ben set up a trail camera facing the woods. He didn't tell Laura. At 3:13 a.m., the first photo triggered. A faint outline between the trees. Too tall, arms too long. 3:17 a.m., another photo. Closer now. 3:24 a.m. The shape at the edge of the yard, facing the cabin. That morning, Ben scrolled through the images while Laura made coffee. His face went pale. He deleted the photos before she saw them. The next night, scratching came at the walls. Long, slow scratches. As though something was tracing the outline of the cabin with claws. Ben burst outside, shotgun in hand. The yard was empty. But the trees looked closer, like the forest had crept forward while they slept. Laura begged him to call the sheriff. Ben drove into town the next day and told his story. The deputy just stared at him. "You bought the old McKinley place?" he asked. Ben nodded. The deputy shook his head slowly. "Should have asked why it's been empty since '98. That night, Laura wouldn't leave the bedroom. Ben sat in the dark living room, shotgun across his knees, watching the tree line through the window. At 2:46 a.m., the scratching started again. But this time, it came from the roof. He ran outside, heart pounding. The flashlight beam swung across the shingles. Nothing. But the woods. The woods were full of eyes. Dozens of them. Faint. Glowing. Unblinking. The next morning, Ben and Laura packed everything they could fit into the truck. They didn't finish the coffee. They didn't lock the door. They just left. When the sheriff checked the place a week later, he found the cabin empty. But the trees were closer than before, almost at the porch steps. There's a saying passed down in the hills of Appalachia, older than the towns, older than the roads. If you hear 3 knocks after midnight, don't open the door. Don't ask who it is, don't speak back, don't even breathe near the handle, just wait. It always goes away. If you open that door, you won't be around for sunrise. Every generation added its own version of the story. Some folks claimed it was the spirit of a peddler who froze to death during a blizzard over 100 years ago, still knocking on doors seeking warmth. Others said it was a miner who'd made a deal with something down below the earth, something that followed him home one night and wore his skin like a suit. But the oldest folks shook their heads at those explanations. "That ain't no spirit," they'd mutter. "It ain't even human, it just comes." And it always came the same way. 3 knocks, slow, steady, then silence. Eli Turner didn't believe in any of that nonsense. 30 years old, an IT worker from the city, he inherited a family cabin from his late uncle, who had lived out in the hills his whole life. Eli didn't know the man well. The last time he'd visited, he was 12 years old and remembered only the smell of wood smoke and the way his uncle always locked the door at sunset, sliding 3 heavy bolts into place. The cabin had sat empty for 2 years now. It needed work. Broken shutters, a leaky roof, weeds up to the windowsills. But it was free, and Eli was tired of city rent. He figured the silence of the mountains would do him good. On his first day in town, he stopped for groceries at the little general store. The place was straight out of the 1940s. Wooden floors, shelves of canned goods, a single humming fridge with milk and eggs. A few old men sat near the window drinking coffee, boots caked in mud, faces lined by decades of sun and wind. They went quiet when Eli mentioned the cabin's location. "Out by Widow's Creek?" one asked slowly. "Yeah," Eli said. "Place has been in my family for years." Another man shook his head. "You staying there?" Eli nodded, confused. "Why?" The first man leaned forward, voice dropping. "You hear 3 knocks after midnight. You don't open the door." The others murmured agreement without looking up from their coffee. Eli laughed nervously. "What, some local ghost story?" The man's eyes didn't blink. "Story keeps folks alive." The first week was uneventful. Eli cleaned the cabin, fixed the roof, got the fireplace working again. At night, he sat on the porch listening to cicadas scream in the treetops and thought maybe this was exactly the peace he needed. But on the 10th night at 12:31 a.m., he woke to the sound. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Boom, boom, boom. He lay frozen in bed, heart thudding. No more knocks came. The wind whispered through the trees. He told himself it was a branch. The next night, 12:32 a.m., the knocks came again. 3 exactly the same. This time, Eli grabbed his flashlight, stomped to the door, and yanked it open. Nothing. The porch was empty. The yard was silent. Even the crickets had stopped. The third night, 12:33 a.m. 3 knocks. Eli didn't move, didn't breathe. He just sat there in bed staring at the door until sunrise. On the 5th night, there was a voice, low, drawn out. "Eli." The sound of his name spoken like a question. Eli's blood turned cold. No one here knew his name. No one even knew he was staying at the cabin. The next day, he drove into town, cornering the old man from the general store. "Somebody's messing with me," Eli snapped. "They keep knocking at night, now they're saying my name." The man stared at him a long time before replying softly, "Did you open the door?" "No." "Then don't, no matter what it says." That night, Eli sat in the dark living room with a shotgun across his lap. 12:34 a.m. 3 knocks. Then the voice. Closer now. "Eli, let me in." The doorknob turned slowly. Eli shouted, "Who's out there?" Silence. Then just me. He didn't open the door. The next morning, he found footprints in the dirt. Bare feet, but too long. Each print had only 3 toes. The 8th night, it started knocking on the walls instead. 3 slow bangs moving around the cabin. Front door, back door, bedroom wall. Always 3. Then it began speaking in different voices. His uncle's voice, his mother's. A little girl crying for help, all begging to be let in. Eli sat shaking in the corner, shotgun aimed at the door as the voices grew angry. By 3 a.m., they stopped. The 9th night was the last. 12:36 a.m. 3 knocks. Then a scraping sound above the door, like claws tracing the wood. "Eli," the voice whispered, "it's so cold out here." The doorknob twisted hard. The wood creaked like something heavy leaned against it. Eli prayed under his breath. The thing outside began laughing. Low. Wet. Not human. The sheriff found the cabin empty the next day. The door was splintered. Bolts snapped clean through. 3 long footprints led inside, but none led back out. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.